Hey guys, Salwete. Welcome back to 6th grade Latin. So, next week we will get further into chapter 7, and I will look at your translations that you turned in on Wednesday and see how those went. Hopefully, they went pretty well, and you were able to check them against the video on Wednesday. And then that little poll thing where I was asking you guys what you individually wanted to learn about ended up being pretty useful because I had multiple kids say that they wanted to hear about Julius Caesar and the Ides of March more, and that makes perfectly good sense. Everything got kind of weird, and school got prematurely. We had like spring break happen early, right around the time that the Ides of March was going to happen. So, yeah, that's a thank you guys for giving me the idea, and that's a super reasonable request given that our Ides of March festivities were kind of put on hold a little bit. But some of this we've talked about before. We built up to this for a long time. We've talked about Julius Caesar here and there. I figure my kids from last year were probably super sick of hearing about Julius Caesar by the end of the year. But I think it's important during your first year of Latin to get really acquainted with a handful of characters like Julius Caesar and Cicero and whoever else, just to kind of give you a sense of familiarity with the Roman Republic in general. So, two guys I'd like to talk about before the end of the year would probably be Cicero and Catiline a little bit. But Julius Caesar, let's talk about him. He's born in the year 100, right? I'll fly through his early life a little bit. He's supposed to be descended from the line of Aeneas. Remember that guy Aeneas, who is the Trojan man who brings his family from Troy after Troy gets burnt down by Greeks all the way to Italy. So Julius Caesar is like, as far as he's concerned, he's literally related to not only Aeneas but Aeneas' mother Venus. When he's a young kid, Rome is first starting to show some kind of structural issues, the Roman Republic that is, in that Roman generals are starting to get a little too powerful. So Caesar's uncle-in-law Marius and this guy Sulla have this big civil war when Julius Caesar is just a teenager. And Julius Caesar is like kind of wrapped up in some of that by being partly related to Marius. He gets out of Rome for a little while. When he comes back, he travels to Greece to study. This is when he has this episode where he is captured by pirates, we've talked about before. Pirates try to hold him ransom. Julius Caesar didn't seem fazed by it. He promised that they would be arrested promptly, and that the amount they were demanding for Julius Caesar's return wasn't even high enough. And yeah, Julius Caesar made good on this. He eventually gets returned to his family because they make the payment, but then promptly Julius Caesar gets some Roman guards and soldiers, and he finds the pirates again, and he has them all arrested, and he gets his money back and everything. So he definitely shows some promise in his younger years. He has a political career for a decade or so, but he's not quite satisfied, it seems. He's very ambitious, and just doing the normal political stuff in Rome doesn't seem to satisfy him. So he links up with a few guys who are going to be important for him. Crassus, who is this really rich guy to the left, supposed to be the richest man in Rome, was going to help fund Julius Caesar's kind of operations. To be a successful Roman general, you needed a lot of money. Pompey, this guy we've mentioned, was a very successful general. He's a guy who got rid of a lot of the pirate population in the Mediterranean. He's also the guy who put down the Spartacus slave rebellion. So Pompey is wildly successful as a general. And these three men together we call the triumvirate, the first triumvirate, which literally just means three men, like triumvirate from Weir. Uh, and they clash with people like Cicero. Cicero, who has come up a little bit, but we need to talk about more, is a very staunch Republican, meaning that he is all about Roman Republic values, which is anti-monarchy, not liking kings, liking laws, and not liking corruption. Whereas Julius Caesar is pretty corrupt. He's a little bit more fast and loose in terms of observing every little law that's put into place. But Julius Caesar, he runs for consulship, and he is elected to consulship. And this is one of something that eventually leads to him going to France. So after his consulship, he goes to France, and he basically spends a whole decade throughout France and parts of Germany as well, modern day Germany, conquering various tribes. France, or Gaul, right? We call it Gaul, or Gallia was the Latin term for this. It won't be called French or France till later. is it's not a unified country by any means. It's just this huge chunk of land right to the north of Italy, right? And it consists of various tribes. So if Italy is in that peninsula, you go right up to the north past uh, the Alps, the Cisalpine Alps, which is in northern Italy, southern France, and then you're in France. It's hard to cross between Italy and France during the winter because of the Alps and how snowy and wintry it gets. But in the summer and other times in the year, you can kind of make that cross pretty easily. And so this map just demonstrates the various campaigns he launched for 10 years. All the while that he is doing this, he is sending back to Rome, uh, like basically it's what we would think of as a book, but of course it'd be in the form of scrolls, and that it's called the Bello Gallico. And he has a scribe with him who helps record all of the events that are going on, all of the successes they have, and they send it back to Rome. So Romans, for almost a whole decade, are reading about the exploits of Julius Caesar, conquering huge chunks of France or Gaul, which is not a territory that had been successfully conquered before this. Um, Julius Caesar's also kind of killing two birds with one stone while being here, because at the end of his consulship, he actually kind of ran into some legal issues. And so by just getting out of Italy, he's able to prolong uh, Rome trying him for any of the crimes or the corruption he might have taken part in while he was consul. But Rome starts to get a little concerned by how much power Julius Caesar is amassing during this time, because not only is he like conquering these territories, he's actually recruiting a lot of Gauls into his army. So his army is growing, and then eventually the Romans demand that he comes back to Rome and goes to trial for some of the little issues he had as a consul. Specifically, he may or may not have taken some money out of the coffers, the official Roman coffers, to fund his exploits. And he says, "Okay, you want me to come back to Italy so you can put me on trial? All right, I'll come back to Italy, but it's not going to be pretty." So this is when he crosses the Rubicon, and the Rubicon's just like a little minor river in the northern part of Italy. It's not an important body of water by any means. The reason that this is such a monumental move is that when you are a Roman general, you are not supposed to come back to Italy with your army unless it was for the purposes of a triumph. Which a triumph we might have mentioned before are these parades where generals would come back after a successful campaign and they would display all of their spoils and some of their prisoners. That's not what Julius Caesar was doing. He was literally marching on Rome. So he was making clear his intent to basically invade Rome as a Roman, and this is what we call civil war, right? And he has this famous phrase, "Alia iacto esto," and that means the die is cast, or let the die be cast. Alia is the word for dice, and so he's saying like, who knows what's going to happen when I do this? This could be bad. It could blow up in my face. It could not work out. But I doubt he had many reservations. Julius Caesar seemed to be a very confident person, and I think he knew exactly what he was doing when he made this move. So all of Rome starts to kind of freak out a little bit. They are literally going to war with this prominent political figure who has spent 10 years being a very successful general and amassing huge armies worth of French. And so they have to decide whether they are going to defend the city itself or if many Roman senators are going to flee, and that's what they do. This is partly it's something that comes down to Pompey, who is sort of kind of momentarily put in charge, and Pompey decides not to try to defend the city of Rome. They basically forfeit it to Julius Caesar, and Pompey flees to Greece, and Roman senators flee to other parts of the empire, including Africa, and some go with Pompey as well. This eventually leads to Julius Caesar's alliance with Cleopatra, but we'll get to that. And skipping way ahead, of course, we have our Ides of March. But that's 5 years later. Okay. Oh, we got Little Caesars and Caesar salad. Uh, so yeah, we've got some Ides lore, but then I'm gonna backtrack and talk about everything that leads up to the Ides of March, because obviously I'm skipping ahead 5 years between the time that he crosses the Rubicon and the Ides of March happens. That is 5 years, so he's only really in charge for about 5 years, and a big chunk of that time he spent um, getting rid of some of the Roman senators who were opposing him. All right. What even is an Ides? The Latin Idus is just this term for what is roughly the middle part of the month. So it's often the 15th. There's like, what is that, 4 or 5 months where the Ides is the 15th, but sometimes it's the 13th for shorter months. And we'll talk about calendars and the way they were changing around this time in a bit. Shakespeare has a famous play version of this. Eventually, whether it's in May or June or August, I'll have you guys perform some of this, like I promised way back when. But in Shakespeare's version, which is based off some of the historical records we have, there was a lot of omens and portents, which is just another word for strange sightings and kind of prophetic omens, leading up to the Ides of March. Julius Caesar's Roman wife was apparently she had some intel from these people who would try to divine the future, that something really bad was going to happen on this day, and she begged him to stay home that day and not go to the Senate, but he didn't listen. And 2 months after the Ides of March, after his assassination, a comet appears in the sky over Italy, and yeah, it just kind of it was visible for days on end. I believe it was about a whole week. This comet was visible. I don't know a ton about comets. I need to brush up on astronomy, but apparently the way it was orbiting the atmosphere, it almost appeared to be suspended and like stationary in the sky. Of course, it wasn't actually. It was moving really rapidly through space, but the way it looked to Romans is that it was just kind of there in the sky for almost a whole week. And a lot of people said, "Oh, that's because Julius Caesar died, and like he's a Roman god now." And so they gave him this title, Divus Iulius, which means like divine son of a god, Julius. All right, but let's backtrack. 5 years before this Ides of March, there he is crossing the Rubicon. I think that's a good portrayal of what the Rubicon probably looks like. It's honestly almost probably something like a stream. So Iacta alia est. That like again, that's um, means the die is cast. Something he supposedly uttered upon crossing this Rubicon. It's a perfect passive participle. But anyway, like I said, senators flee. No thanks to Pompey. Um, Meaning that some people probably wanted to stay in Rome and defend the city itself and not forfeit it to Julius Caesar. But Pompey, who is put in charge, says, "No, we got to get out of here, man. We got to go." And so they do. And Julius Caesar, he doesn't stop in Rome for long. He leaves his top soldier, Mark Antony, there while he goes to clean up uh, like the Roman territory and by way of taking out some of his opponents. So Julius Caesar now has all of France. The Italian peninsula has basically been forfeited to him. That's that blue peninsula to the left, or in the middle of the screen, right? But to the right, this Greek territory, Turkey, further to the west of Greece, and then parts of northern Africa. Those are going to serve as safe havens for many of the Roman senators like Cicero and Cato and Pompey as well, who are opposed to Julius Caesar. And so if Julius Caesar actually wants to be the top dog and stay that way, he's going to have to get rid of people like Pompey. And this is just me calling him this, but I would refer to this Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey, right, as the ultimate adversary for Julius Caesar. Because, yeah, up until now, Pompey is just super successful as a general. He not only eradicated the pirate population in the Mediterranean when he was younger, he took care of this, or he kind of helped out with the Spartacus slave rebellion. And also remember, he was part of the triumvirate about a decade before this. He was allies with Julius Caesar. Though, in a way, Julius Caesar might have kind of like allied with people like him and Crassus as a way of keeping an eye on them. So let's see here. Pompey runs to Greece. He's in Greece, and they have a battle. Julius Caesar goes straight to Greece. This is the first place he goes to right after he gets a little settled in the Italian peninsula and sets up Mark Antony to be in charge. And he goes to Greece, and there's this battle called the Battle of Pharsalus, which is in this northwestern part of Greece. And Julius Caesar wins decisively. Pompey does not die. Pompey is able to get away, but Julius Caesar wins. So if you look at that map to the lower left, you can see Julius Caesar's forces were the blue ones, clashing against Pompey. And apparently, it mostly amounted to Julius Caesar doing this pretty straightforward sounding strategy of having some of his men route Pompey, meaning that they went around. If you see to the upper right, you have that second set of forces or troops for Julius Caesar. They come in through this body of water, and uh, they approach Pompey's men from the side. So Pompey's men get kind of surrounded in a way by having men coming from the north as well as from the south. And Julius Caesar, I mean, he's been well trained at this point for over a decade fighting in France. And as far as we can tell, he was a very tactical, um, very intellectual general. And he defeats Pompey. So that's that for Pompey's troops. But Pompey is able to flee, and he goes to Alexandria. We've talked about Alexandria a little bit. We're going to talk about it a little more right now. But he goes to Alexandria, and it's important to know what's going on in Alexandria at this time. Okay, Alexandria is the capital of Egypt, and Egypt is a client state of Rome, meaning they're not quite owned by Rome, but they pay taxes to Rome, and they have this friendly relationship with Rome, though technically Rome has some authority over them. But right now, during this time, Cleopatra the Seventh, she's the when people talk about Cleopatra, they're talking about Cleopatra the Seventh, basically. But there technically are many other Cleopatras who preceded her, and her brother Ptolemy XII uh, are having a dynastic conflict, meaning they are fighting over the throne. They are momentarily married, and then they have a falling out. Cleopatra gets ousted from the city, and Ptolemy is left in charge of Alexandria at the time that Pompey comes there. And we have multiple Ptolemies. Like all of the brothers in this family are named Ptolemy. It's kind of crazy. So Cleopatra right now is in exile, and her brother, her little brother who kicked her out, he's in charge. And so Pompey goes to Ptolemy the 12th. He arranges a little meeting as soon as he arrives on the shore of Egypt. He's going to have a little chat with Ptolemy, basically asking for an alliance, and he's gonna come to him and say, "Hey, I got defeated by Julius Caesar in Greece, but maybe we can work together. Julius Caesar's probably gonna come to Africa next, since there's some Roman senators here. You want to help me out?" And Ptolemy's like, "Yeah, totally, except not really at all." And he has Pompey executed immediately. I only laugh just because it's as far as we know, Pompey did not think this was going to happen. He didn't think this was a trap or anything, but it very much was a trap. Ptolemy betrays him immediately, as you can see in that picture, and yeah, he gets rid of Pompey just like that. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but the main reason is simply that word had already spread throughout the Mediterranean that Pompey had been defeated. And so Ptolemy already knew that he lost his army, and at that point, no one was holding out for Pompey to be successful at this point. Everyone understood that the winds had shifted and that Julius Caesar was going to be victorious in this conflict between him and the Roman senators. So, Julius Caesar, he gets to Alexandria a little while after this. And Pompey does, or Ptolemy rather. There's a lot of P names. Ptolemy does not have Julius Caesar assassinated, obviously, because, like I said, Ptolemy is interested in helping Julius Caesar, and that's part of why he betrayed Pompey. So he says, "Hey, like I got rid of Pompey for you. Like, how's it going, Julius Caesar? You want to like have an alliance?" And Julius Caesar's like, "Maybe I'll have an alliance. I'm not sure. I'm kind of mad at you, honestly, for getting rid of my adversary. I wanted to do that myself." That was a big thing for Julius Caesar. He likes uh, kind of like dealing with his opponents personally. Sometimes even so much as like giving them mercy and making them grovel and beg for forgiveness, basically. And so he's not able to do that because Ptolemy already took care of Pompey. Julius Caesar doesn't like this. But Julius Caesar is staying in Alexandria for a little while. And all of a sudden, he is approached by Cleopatra. So apparently, Cleopatra has been in exile, and she gets one of her henchmen to roll her up in a big rug, like a big throw rug, and take her into the quarters that Julius Caesar is staying in Alexandria. And he unfurls the rug, and Cleopatra pops out and says, "Hey, she's not supposed to be in Alexandria because of the conflict she's having with her brother, but there she is." And she approaches Julius Caesar and says, "Hey, I don't like my brother. I want you to side with me, not him, and help me become queen of Egypt again and kick out my brother." And apparently, Julius Caesar he really gets along with Cleopatra. They seem to have a lot in common in terms of being very ambitious, and they hit it off. And Julius Caesar says, "Yeah, you know what? I'm going to help you." And so what we end up having is Julius Caesar and Cleopatra at the bottom there, fighting against Ptolemy, Cleopatra's brother, and their sister Arsinoe. And this is a siege that takes place in Alexandria, and it lasts for months and months. So Julius Caesar and Cleopatra have part of the city that they're stationed in, whereas Ptolemy and Arsinoe have another part. And unfortunately, a big part of the city gets kind of destroyed or wrecked and turned into rubble during this conflict. But eventually, Julius Caesar and Cleopatra are successful, so Julius Caesar installs Cleopatra as Queen of Egypt. Ptolemy is no more. That's the Pharos Lighthouse, by the way. That's one of the seven wonders of the world. Yeah, and there's unfortunately some bad fires in Alexandria during this time. Their really nice library gets burnt, which is too bad. But yeah, we've talked about Alexandria was a very interesting city, similar to Rome in that it was this major center for trade and the appreciation of art and writing. Um, yeah, just it wasn't totally destroyed, but it did weather a good bit of destruction. And then Julius Caesar and Cleopatra celebrate by going on a little cruise together. After those are the seven wonders that came up when we talked about the Pharos Lighthouse. After this, Julius Caesar has just a little more cleaning up to do. He has a conflict in Africa to take care of. Some of Pompey's leftover troops go to Spain, so Julius Caesar has to go to Spain to take care of them. He has a quick little thing in Asia, Asia Minor, Turkey, and that's where we get the phrase "Veni Vidi Vici," I came, I saw, I conquered, because he was able to take care of this little conflict in Greece, or Asia rather, within like a few days. So yeah, we go from when he's crossing the Rubicon, him just having the peninsula in France and Spain, to eventually he is able to take over the entire Roman territory, and that green territory eventually becomes his really quickly too. And then he goes back to Rome. He has four triumphs in a row, four triumphal processions. Let's see. Remember these triumphs or triumphus were these parades that I mentioned earlier, where Roman generals would celebrate all of the spoils. There'd be these huge parades. All of the city would come out. There'd be free bread and all of this celebratory activity. And Julius Caesar has four of them: one for France, one for Africa, one for Egypt, which is the same as, or is in Africa, but they were counted as separate campaigns, and then one for this quick little thing he did in Asia Minor. So 4 days back to back, he has these huge parades. Apparently, during the Egyptian one, they are parading Arsinoe, Cleopatra's sister, through the streets, and she is supposed to be led to a place at the end of the parade where she's going to be executed. This was a common thing. If there were specific enemies or enemy generals that the Roman general had been successful against, they would be paraded through the streets, and then eventually they'd be taken to a dungeon, basically. But the Roman people are so outraged to see this young woman be a prisoner of war that they demand that this princess be let go. And so Arsinoe is given mercy by the Roman people, who say that she shouldn't be punished, partly just because she was a young person and she a woman. But anyway, the same can't be said for her brother Ptolemy. So yeah, this eventually leads us to Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus coming into play. But Julius Caesar, he just has about almost 4 years in Rome as imperator, is the title he bestows upon himself, which makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable. They think it's basically Julius Caesar being a king. Julius Caesar always reassures people like, no, I'm not a king, I'm not the king. But he gives himself all of these titles. They do away with the consulship, basically. And this is when we start to see Rome shift from a republic to an empire, though that won't officially happen until Augustus. But along come these two senators, Brutus and Cassius, and them, along with several other senators, they do not like this. They kind of go along with things for a little while. They respect Julius Caesar when they're actually not talking about him behind his back. But they, along with plenty of Romans, are not a fan of what's going on because of these hardcore values for the Roman Republic, being against kings and tyrants and monarchy. They just think everything that Julius Caesar has done is wrong. And so apparently, the way Shakespeare writes these characters, which is based on some historical accuracy, Cassius is the one to kind of convince Brutus to do this. Brutus is unsure of whether he should carry this out and go through with this, but eventually Cassius gets through to him. And there is a weird coincidence between the fact that, if you remember, hundreds of years before Rome becomes an empire, it was a kingdom, right? It was a monarchy. They had 7 kings over the course of a few hundred years. And the last king was actually expelled by this Brutus's ancestor. So this whole Brutus line, the line that leads to this Brutus, is already known for being a line of people who are basically king slayers, people who have gotten rid of kings because they don't like kings. And so this might play into some things for Brutus as well in terms of deciding what to ultimately do. And so in the weeks leading up to Julius Caesar's assassination, his wife is getting all sorts of bad feelings. He's still married to this Roman woman, even though sometimes Cleopatra will come visit the city and stay in a palace outside of the city. And he technically, anyway, he kind of is still friendly with Cleopatra at this point. But Julius Caesar's wife isn't able to convince him to stay home, and Julius Caesar is just about to go on a campaign to Asia. He would have done that, as far as I know, like the day after or the week following the Ides of March. But he always says, "Oh no, don't worry about it. Like I think it's fine. You pay these mystics to predict the future and prophesize, but I think they're wrong. I'm probably going to be fine. I think the Roman people love me, and nothing ever bad could happen." But something bad does happen, and up to 20 plus senators conspire to get rid of him. And like I said, there's kind of some mixed feelings towards Julius Caesar. All these senators obviously disliked him enough to feel like this was the right thing to do. But moments after this happens, Mark Antony, his top soldier, gives a very rousing speech in the forum, talking about how the conspirators are really bad and that they shouldn't have done this and that they need to be, imprisoned and all of this. And a lot of the Roman people agree. Rome had gone through a lot of civil war and chaos leading up to this period of time. And even though Julius Caesar was a part of some of that chaos, I think the Roman people were largely welcoming the chance to see things stabilize. And if it meant Julius Caesar technically being a king or a pseudo king, I think they were okay with that because now things were actually starting to calm down. But after this, obviously, that is going to change. And we have Shakespeare writing about this a little bit, obviously, in one of his more famous plays. And of course, we talked about how Julius Caesar's line will eventually lead to Augustus. So this basically leaves off where we had picked up earlier this semester talking about Augustus. Augustus and Mark Antony start to fill this power vacuum. They both work together to actually fight against Brutus and Cassius, and they win successfully in a battle in Greece. And then eventually Augustus and Mark Antony come to blows, and Mark Antony pairs up with Cleopatra, and they lose to Augustus, and Augustus becomes our first actual official emperor, which leads to the Pax Romana. So the peace that Rome wanted so badly around the time Julius Caesar was assassinated, it finally comes to them, but it takes another 2 decades, right? We have 2 decades during which Mark Antony and Augustus are either working together and or coming to blows towards the end to fill this power vacuum that kind of opened up when Julius Caesar was assassinated. So yeah, that is the gist of the Ides of March. I might pick up on some more of this next week. But yeah, I also might keep asking you guys what you want to hear about just because it's interesting to see what you guys are thinking about. All right. I hope you have a good weekend. Once again, I just want to tell you guys that y'all are doing an amazing job of keeping up with all this online stuff. It's a totally new way of doing things, but you guys are adapting really well. So, on behalf of all the teachers, just want to say thanks and keep up the good work. Have a good weekend. I will see you all on Monday.